In today's episode, we are looking at solving quadratic equations using completing of squares. In our last episode, we were looking at solving quadratic equations using the quadratic formula, and we promised to see how we get the quadratic formula. The quadratic formula is derived by the use of completing squares. From our general equation, which is ax squared plus bx plus c equals to 0, where a should not be 0. In our first step, we shall change the coefficient of x squared to 1, meaning we have to get rid of the a, which is the coefficient of x squared. We do this by dividing. We divide throughout by a, so that we remain with the x squared independent plus b over a plus c over a equaling to 0. After making x squared independent, in step 2, we take the constant on the other side, right hand side. That is x squared plus b over ax equaling to negative c over a, because it was a positive, and after crossing the equal signs, it became negative. We should take note of these steps because they are the ones that we shall be using to solve quadratic equations using the completing of square method. Our first step was we must make x squared independent by dividing throughout by the coefficient, which was a. Step 2, we are taking the constant on the right hand side of the equation. So if it is a positive, it changes to a negative. If it was a negative, then it had to change to positive. Those are so far 2 steps. Step 3, we divide the coefficient of x by 2 and add the square of the result to both sides of the equation. This is where it gets interesting and also confusing, but the logic is simple. After dividing by a, the coefficient of x is now b over a. So when we divide this by 2, we shall get b over 2a, and then we square this result and add it on both sides of the equation. So that gives us x squared plus b over a x plus b over 2a in bracket squared equaling to negative c over a plus b over 2a squared. Let's repeat this. Our first step was making x squared independent by dividing by its coefficient. After making x squared independent, we had to take the constant on the other side. So when we take c over a on the other side, it becomes a negative. In step 3, we are saying that we shall get the coefficient of x, which is b over a. We divide it by 2. So that gives us b over 2a. And square the result. Then add on both sides. Let's continue. In step 4, we factorize and simplify. When we factorize x squared, we had x squared plus b over ax plus b over 2a squared. When we factorize this, we come up with the x plus b over 2a in bracket squared. And we also open brackets on the other side to give us negative c over a plus b squared over 4a squared. We square both the numerator and the denominator. After that, we simplify. We get the LCM and simplify. Remember, since the other one is a square and we want to find the value of x, therefore we must take away the square by introducing the square root on both sides. So the square root on the left hand side will cancel with the square to remain with the x plus b over 2a. And then we get also the square root of the right hand side, which gives us a positive or a minus. Remember, the square root of a number is always a positive or minus. So when we simplify this and make x the subject, meaning we are taking the b over 2a on the right hand side, which becomes a minus. So when we simplify, we end up with x equaling to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. And hence, that is how we derive the quadratic formula. So after now going through the 4 steps of completing squares, let us look at the examples. In our example 6, we are told to solve the equation x squared minus 4x minus 8 equals to 0. But this time we are using completing of squares. In completing of squares, our first step was to make x squared independent, and indeed here it is already given when it is independent, so we don't need to do that because x squared is standing alone. It has no coefficient, or its coefficient is 1, which is a silent, so we don't need to make it independent. So what we are now going to do, we are going to step 2 of taking the constant on the right hand side, that is negative 8. When the negative 8 crosses, it becomes a positive. Therefore, it will give us x squared minus 4x equaling to 8. After that, we've seen that we get the coefficient of x, which is a 4. We divide it by 2, which gives us 2, and square, and then we add on both sides. That's why we have plus 2 squared on both sides, because that 2 is 4 divided by 2, and then square, and finally we add on both sides. After that, we factorize and simplify. So when you factorize the expression on the left hand side, it gives us x minus 2 squared equaling to 8 plus 4, which is 12. So we get the square root and we take the 2 the other side to give us x as positive or minus root 12 plus 2, which gives us 5.46 or negative 1.46. that is to 3 significant figures. So majorly we are going through the 4 steps. Once you master the 4 steps of completing of squares, you master the whole concept, and it will be very easy for you to apply it. Step number 1, make x squared independent, or make its coefficient be 1, because 1 is a silent coefficient, does not show up. After that, then take the constant on the other side. That is step 2. Step 3, step 4. Step 4, divide the coefficient of x by 2, square the result and add on both sides. After that, simplify and make x the subject. As simple as that. Let us look at our next example. In example 7, we are supposed to use the method of completing the square to solve the equation 2x squared plus x minus 6 equaling to 0. So our first step is to make x squared independent, or to make its coefficient become 1. That is done by dividing throughout by the coefficient of x squared, which is a 2. So if we divide throughout by 2, we shall end up with x squared plus a half x minus 3 equaling to 0. After that, we take the constant on the other side, which gives us x squared plus a half x equaling to positive 3. After taking the constant on the other side, we now get the coefficient of x, which is a half, divide it by 2. When you divide a half by 2, you get a quarter. So we square this a quarter and add it on both sides. After that, we shall factorize the expression on the left hand side, which is x squared plus a half x plus the square of a quarter. When you factorize this, you come up with x plus a quarter into bracket squared. We also simplify on the right hand side to give us 49 over 16. Then we get the square root of both sides. The square root on the left hand side will cancel with the square to remain with x plus a quarter. The square root of 49 over 16 is a positive or negative 7 over 4. Then we take a quarter on the right hand side, which becomes a minus. So when we simplify, remember we have two cases combined together. We have the positive and the minus, hence giving us two answers, that is 1.5 or -2. Good. Let us look at example 8.